you, Stephanie, and welcome everyone. My name is Adria Cortes. I'm a member of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians, and I'm from Boyne City, Michigan. I am a senior program manager at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges in Reno, Nevada. Thank you for joining us today. This presentation was developed under grant number SJI-19-P.051 from the State Justice Institute. The points of view expressed are those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the State Justice Institute. This Centering Equity series focuses on families affected by opioids and other substance use disorders in state court, specifically in cases involving the Indian Child Welfare Act. Before we get started, we want to let you know about our opioids in the courts toolkit. We'll put the link in the chat, and we encourage you to visit the site to watch our previous webinar on difficult conversations, as well as find information on targeted resource mapping. So today, here are our learning objectives. We hope that by the end of this hour, you will understand the role of centering equity with service referrals for tribal families facing substance use disorders. We plan to discuss ways in which court teams can work together to identify and generate service providing resources. And we hope to help you identify key partners and strategies important to referring tribal families to services. As Stephanie said, we encourage you all to participate in the chat. From this point on, I will be facilitating the chat. And Sheldon will be facilitating the discussion with our expert faculty. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sheldon.
Good afternoon. Good to be on here with you guys. I see so many people that are my friends and colleagues, and it's good to see your guys' names. Why don't you use the chat right now and type in what your name is and where you're calling in from and your position, just so we kind of know what we're talking about. And I will be asking you questions to chime in at the chat. So throughout this conversation. Quickly, my name is Sheldon Spotted Elk. I'm a Northern Cheyenne tribal member, and I say that with pride right now because Victory Day is coming up. It's actually tomorrow, and that's the day that the Battle of Little Bighorn. I'm even wearing my Sitting Bull shirt today. So that's the day that Cheyennes killed Custer. So you guys can shake my hand and pat me on the back next time you see me. Our gift to humanity there. So it's great to be on here. We have an awesome panel. We're gonna talk about ICWA courts and their work and how they center equity and service delivery. So it's gonna be a really great conversation that we're gonna have. With that, I'll let my colleagues and the panelists here to introduce themselves. So why don't we just go right down the list here? So we'll start with Tara and do a brief introduction.
Good afternoon. My name is Tara McLain Manthey. I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation, and I'm the executive director at Denver Indian Family Resource Center. And I'm joined by my coworker Alyssa, who's not on the list here, but is bringing a lot of great additions today. So I'll hand it over to Alyssa to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Willie. I'm a citizen of the Choctaw Nation, and I'm a Seminole Tribe of Florida descendant. I grew up on the Brighton Seminole Reservation in Florida, and I'm currently now a family engagement specialist at the Denver Indian Family Resource Center.
Good afternoon. My name is Pax Moultrie. I'm a judge in Denver Juvenile Court. I've been in that position since April of 2020. I do preside over Denver Juvenile Court's ICWA court docket. Prior to that, I was a magistrate in Jefferson County, about 10-12 miles west of Denver, for those of you who aren't familiar, in a domestic relations, child welfare, and delinquency docket as well. Nice to see you all.
Hi, I'm Shannon Meddings. I'm with the Denver City Attorney's Office. I've been there for approximately 16 years, and I represent the Denver Department of Human Services, Child Protection Unit, and Dependency and Neglect cases. And I have been involved with the development of Denver Juvenile Court's ICWA court docket, as well as assigned to that docket since its inception in 2017.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Meredith Halstead, and I'm a child protection supervisor at Denver Human Services. And prior to that, I was actually in the role of a service navigator in the ICWA Court. And a service navigator basically helps ensure that during those court hearings that Judge Moultrie oversees, that the families are able to get linked up with services right there from the courtroom, and essentially leave the courtroom set up with services and moving forward in their treatment plans. I've been at the department for about 15 years and was also helping in the creation of ICWA Court about 4.5 years ago.
You, everybody. And so why don't we just hook that first question right there. If I don't know anything about what an ICWA Court is, what is an ICWA Court? Just for everybody that's maybe new to this idea of what an ICWA Court is, and why did Denver adopt an ICWA Court? And I'll ask that question to Shannon. I know you're at the very beginning of it, and Meredith, and then also you, Judge. I know you're fresh on this docket, and so what is an ICWA Court and why is it important in Denver?
I think each ICWA court may work a little differently for those that have been developed around the country. And if I recall correctly, Denver had the 3rd ICWA court in the nation. Denver is also a little bit unique that we have a juvenile court, the only one in the host state. And in our cases, when a family is identified as having American Indian, Alaska Native heritage, and there's a reason to know that it is an Indian Child Welfare Act case, then that case from any of our other judicial divisions is placed into the ICWA docket. And so much of what we do is try from the get-go, one, to determine that heritage so that we get notices to tribes as soon as possible. And we also have tribal involvement from the beginning. We set our court at a specific date and time that occurs twice a month, so that also the tribes that we work with have an idea of what that availability is, especially since they're involved with cases all around the country. It can sometimes help facilitate their involvement. Overall, the case maybe doesn't look a whole lot different than a normal dependency and neglect case, except that everyone who's involved, from practitioners to attorneys, has specialized training with regard to the Indian Child Welfare Act. And there's much more emphasis in ensuring that the act is followed, both, I think, in to the letter of the law and also the spirit of the law. We try to ensure that the courtroom setting itself feels comfortable to our families that we serve, as well as I think one of the most unique pieces of our court is looking at that service delivery component. And I'll let Meredith talk about that because that's really been the part that she's been exemplary in developing for our court.
And so Denver ICWA Court has a service navigator who sits in the courtroom. Well, right now it's virtual courtroom, so sits in the virtual courtroom right now. But when we were in person, would physically sit in the courtroom, typically right next to Alyssa or her counterparts with some of our service providers, Denver Indian Health and Family Services and Denver Indian Family Resource Center. That service navigator would be able to walk up and talk with the families, figure out what the families were needing, put in referrals either to our partners who were sitting in the courtroom and do this warm handoff of services, whether it be for supervised visitation, whether it be for in-home life skills, whether it be to link them with a mental health or substance use evaluation, or sometimes our mental health professional would go and meet with them in a meeting room outside in the hall and start doing an intake to get them started into treatment or services right away. So I think
Thank you, froze, Meredith. Well, while she's coming back, maybe talk a little bit. You take it over. Okay, she is back.
piece of having that efforts component.
We lost you there for a second, Meredith.
All right, we may have lost Meredith again, so I'll pipe up here for the moment. You know, again, I've been in this role since April of 2020. And so I can't really speak to the before times, but what I can tell you with respect to during the pandemic, one of the things I've seen is, as Shannon has already mentioned, is one, the value of practitioners who are doing the work regularly enough to both understand and appreciate the historical perspective, as well as, you know, appreciating both, one, the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, but also building the relationships with our community providers to know what services are available for families and to get them quickly connected. And that's one of the things that's been really helpful for me, as Meredith was talking about having the service navigators in court, even though we're not physically in court. I'm physically in the courtroom today, but no one's really been physically in the courtroom for well over a year at this point. And but they're still coming to the virtual court. They're still available to update me and other parties on availability of services, and connecting people kind of in that real time to help support our families and kids.
That's great, and that will lead us right to our next question. And I do want to, and when Meredith comes on, we'll engage her on that. If we could go to the next slide. And so we know that ICWA has been described in amicus briefs as the gold standard of child welfare. And when I read ICWA, when I read the federal law, I imagine this little illustration here is that we fight to keep children within those concentric circles, you know, and we use active efforts. And so I guess that's the question I want to know from the Denver Resource Center. What is the Denver Indian Resource Center? What is a resource center? Maybe describe that to us. And then how do you work with families? How do you engage Native families in the Denver community? And why is that important to making that active efforts finding to prevent the removal of an Indian child? So if you could talk to us about that collaboration and how that work has been going, that'd be great. And then the next question, I want everybody to respond to this in the chat box, and then we'll go through the panel. We have diversity that's on this panel today and that's listening in. When you're a gold standard worker, when you are gold standard, what are you showing up? What are the attributes that you possess when you're engaging with families, when you're engaging with children, when you're gold standard? So our listeners on this, maybe you could write some stuff in the chat box for us. But the question, I'll send it on to Tara and to Alyssa about the first question about active efforts in engaging families.
Yeah, thank you. So Denver Indian Family Resource Center was established 21 years ago in response to the disproportionate removal of Native children from their families. And we provide wraparound and support services to families involved in the child welfare system to help reunify or keep children within those concentric circles of family, relatives, and communities and tribes in order to preserve tribal cultures and sovereignty. And so we do that through a few areas of work, including our family engagement services, which I'll let Alyssa share what that is, but also resource and referral, so connecting to diaper banks, to food resources, housing and any kind of other services that people might need. And then we also are part of the Native American Housing Circle and working on developing housing and advocating for Native people in the Denver area, which is a really hard housing market. And we know that housing is one of the biggest barriers to family economic security and reunification. So we work extra hard in that area here. So Alyssa, will you tell us about family engagement services and what we do here?
Yes, so so the work I do as a family engagement specialist, I work with the parents that most parents that have open cases, or with the counties, or if there kind of might be county involvement. And so those cases come to me, and then we kind of do our intake and assessment on what the needs are. And sometimes that looks like helping them get to treatment, whatever their case plan goals are, just helping to support with that. And also we provide a nurturing parenting class, which I facilitate. And so we get a lot of our parents in those classes, and we do case management, and we're contacting with the caseworkers and other service providers that the family is engaged with or involved with. And we're basically there as a support to keep that engagement going, so that they are able to get their children back, or get satisfy court needs, those type of things. And I think we're the only providers in Denver right now that are doing this work. Most of my clients come from Adams County in their ICWA court, so I'm more on that side with Adams County, and then we have other programs and things that we're starting to develop to meet the needs that we're seeing for parents, and to get them reunited with their children.
Thank you. And we're kind of having a little bit of skip with the connection, but I know Meredith was talking to us a little bit about that service navigator and how they sit in the back of the courtroom with you. And it was kind of giving me this image. How's that collaboration when it comes to actually working with families and delivering active efforts and making sure that families' needs are being met? What are some of the things that you need to show up with to be gold standard, Alyssa? Or you found that works when working with Indian families? I think she might be frozen. So Meredith, are you on by any chance? Oh,
yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So working with families, Native families, even though that we have Native people from different tribes, different areas, because Denver was a relocation city, and so we have a lot of different tribes into the Denver area. And something I guess we kind of center around some of the things that are similar in the way of being a Native person, like our traditions, our cultures. They may all be different, but there's still some similar for us as people. And so when we are engaging with our Native clients, sometimes it's just like, even just seeing our face, like another Native person is a lot. Or having the understanding, I think, of the background, or if someone's from the reservation, understanding tribal is helpful. Doing the work, a lot of background, and so trying to be informed and looking at what slaves,
So we're only getting
and so a lot of it. Can you hear me? I don't know if this. Yeah.
Maybe you could turn off your camera.
So.
Maybe you could turn off your
Okay,
camera and see if that works a little bit better. So.
All right. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Hello?
Yes.
I don't know where I left off. So like the work we do. Okay. Yeah. So just working with Native families and having that, like, I guess that relationship that we build with them as well. And it feels a lot of time, it feels like a lot of hard work because it's more, you're knowing the families, we are familiar with the communities, and then those resources and things that we can provide. And then some of the things that we do with like my parenting class that I facilitate, that has a Native American component. So we add those things into the parenting. And so yeah, that's a lot of things that we do. And I think even just being an advocate, sometimes just being the other person in the room that's a Native person in a family team meeting or in court, or that's also like, they have that familiar face or person that understands them maybe more than the system would.
Well, thank you. Awesome. And Meredith, are you back on?
I think I'm back on. I hope I'm back on and that you guys can hear me okay.
Crystal clear, actually. And you were describing that relationship, and maybe talk to us a little bit about the role maybe of cultural humility when we talk about centering equity. And so you're engaging with DIFRAC to deliver services to families, but what is the role of cultural humility when you're helping navigate services for families?
So I can talk to that from both perspectives of the caseworker who's working with the families, but also in the service navigation. I think it's really just being willing to listen to the family's story, get to know them, and then also understand that when we walk in with our big shiny badge, we're not always seen as trusted individuals initially, and it does take a while to build up that trust. And that it's really important to understand where parents are coming from. And again, I think it was Alyssa who said we're an urban relocation center. So some of the clients that we work with have been here for generations and are much more familiar with, Denver's hustle and bustle. Whereas we do have some families that are coming down that were raised in reservation communities. And so just getting to understand where that individual family is coming from, what feels most comfortable to them. Certainly offering the culturally appropriate services. Many of our caseworkers who are working, especially on ICWA cases, will get out there to meet with families much more than just the one time per month, which is the required standard, because it is about that relationship building and trust building, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while, lots of listening, lots of understanding. And I think really with the gold standard, it's figuring out how do we break down every barrier that we can that is in that client's way of being successful. And so it may mean coming back to the drawing board a number of different times, but being willing to work with them and understand that there may be a couple steps back, but that we can then continue to move forward. And how do we get there, and what help do they need in continuing to make that progress?
Thank you, Meredith. That's great. And if we go to the next slide, and this is a question I do want to pose to, we'll start with Shannon, and we'll go to the judge, Judge Moultrie after that. And I like that perfect segue, as Meredith said a lot of what, even one of the comments in there, former Judge Mo Portley from Arizona, he says, having a listen first orientation, but what do you find, Shannon, when you're at your gold standard best in these cases? And what is the role of equity? What is the role of being able to meet families where they're at from the city or county bench or the county advocacy table in courtrooms? So what's that look like for you?
It pulls in a couple of different things for me as a county attorney or a city attorney representing the department. Obviously, I don't provide service delivery to families, but it is my job, I think, to be more than competent in understanding the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is vast, and we have lots of changing case law, particularly in the last few years. So understanding that well, and then if I have that understanding, then I can explain that to my client, who is the Department of Human Services, the caseworker, to help them understand what are the preferred placements, what does that mean. What are active efforts, having an understanding of how our court system works, so that and our ICWA docket works, so that the caseworker understands what's involved, what that service delivery can look like, and to ensure that they get a hold of Meredith, or the person who's now in Meredith's position, so that the proper services are set up right away. Another another piece that's been really important for our court and in helping me even be able to do that is doing relationship building with tribes. It's important to understand for Denver, as has been mentioned, it's a relocation city, and we do have a sizable Native American population, but we have no tribes within the Denver metro area. And in fact, only 2 in the state, over a 7 to 8 hour drive away. So we, as a court system, have done a couple of outreach trips to tribal reservations and met with different ICWA specialists, particularly the ones that from where we see families most often. And from that, I've been able even to build a lot of relationships with those ICWA specialists that then by having that contact, that relationship, and building that trust, I can give their information to the caseworker, put them in touch, and oftentimes there's a better connection, I think, than what there would have been in the past, because we have been able to do that relationship building. So that's probably going a little bit above and beyond, or something, a different aspect of what a county attorney's role might be in just, again, a non-ICWA dependency and neglect case. But it is a role that really is important in ensuring that the act works best.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Moultrie, what's your thoughts about, I know you, back when you were an attorney, you sat at that table as well. So what's your thoughts on now being a judge, and when you're gold standard, what does that look like for you?
Well, I think it was Judge Portley who put it in the comments, is, certainly I'm trying to listen, and I ask a lot of questions. And I think the first thing I do is not assume I know anything. Just because I sit up here on the bench and wear a robe doesn't mean I necessarily know a whole lot. I'm usually the person with the least amount of information in the courtroom. And so I really rely on the professionals to let me know what's going on with the family. I try very hard to speak directly to parents and kids. And again, listening to what it is that they're telling me that they need, specifically asking, and also coming from a place of, again, with the listening piece, I guess I'll just tell you a story. I've got an ICWA matter on my caseload where we've got a young woman who I spoke to recently who was fairly distraught and was kind of telling what was going on in her life. And, I think sometimes, I know I've been guilty of it as a judge, a judicial officer, is when you've got older youth who, maybe need their own kind of therapeutic work, but they're worried about their parents. And so I think, I've been in the practice or habit of sometimes saying it, but I need you to focus on yourself. And I told her this, and she was so distraught. And she said, everybody keeps telling me this, but I'm so worried about X. I'm so worried about my mom. I'm worried about my dad. And in that moment, it struck me, oh, I needed to listen to that. For her, that was a piece of her mental health, of kind of having the information she needed to have about her parents and how they were doing to try to move forward. And so, being open to those teaching moments, recognizing that, we talk about obviously ICWA as far as the law, but being open to learning about various tribal cultures, but also recognizing that culture is not monolithic, and also that there's a culture of family. And so being, open and mindful to all of those things. And, I guess specifically with respect to the court process, often I worry that professionals kind of talk above and around the people who are in court. So I try very hard to explain to folks, what's going on, what they can expect next from me, and tell them when I don't know the answer to things. And also make accommodations. Obviously most of our court proceedings have been virtual in the past year, but I've told everybody that if you want to come to court, I'm here. We can make accommodations to do a hybrid hearing, or if you've got clients who want to come in, they can come to court if that'll work better for them. And just recognizing that, sometimes the court process itself is a traumatic process.
Thank you. And when you were talking about that, it reminds me of a report I recently read. Sophie Gutowski and Alicia Summers wrote a report about quality hearings, and there's so much impact that a judge has with the breadth and depth of a conversation they have with parents that appear before them. And, and it makes a significant difference of whether they feel like they're being included in the case and whether they're being listened to. And so I do think that's especially important. I did look up some stats before we got on this call, is that the latest AFGARs that were produced 2019, we know that 63% of cases, and this is nationwide, so it's not very specific to Denver, but maybe you guys could give us some lights on this if you know this anecdotally, or if you actually know the stats, that 63% of all cases are open because of neglect. The prominent reason of neglect is attached to substance use disorder. That makes up almost a little over 1/3 of cases that are involved in children that are involved in child welfare cases. Is that similar to your jurisdiction, your ICWA court jurisdiction? And is there an added component to that? And especially, I think, working with families and delivering that services. And I know we kind of had a little internet hiccup with that. Meredith, Alyssa, and Tara, when you're working with those families, like maybe tell us a little bit about that collaboration and what that looks like, and why is it important to include the family and finding out those services. I know in some jurisdictions there's like this boilerplate service delivery that ends up being adopted at disposition, but why is it important that we tailor those services to families is the question I'm asking. And maybe we could go to the next slide as well. Did we lose Meredith? Nope, we did. Alyssa, are you on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess what comes to mind is like this collaboration that we do have with the courts. Even as a service provider, it's good for us to be included. So what makes like the ICWA courts that we do work with, it kind of like they were talking about the streamlining of the services where we see the clients and we see the caseworkers and everyone in the same space really, and so that's easy for us, for everyone to know who we are, and then the families know that we know everyone as well. So I think that helps build that relationship for how to keep engaged. Like I can talk to clients and be like, well, did you talk to the caseworker? Or I can talk to them for you. And so that's really helpful. And on the other side, that we don't just work with Denver and Adams County, we work with the several metro Denver County area around here. And so some of the courts that we have, like we'll have clients maybe come in voluntarily and they were like, hey, I have a case. I want to talk, help me with our case. And so when we do talk with caseworkers, sometimes we get a runaround. Sometimes they'll be like, who are you? Or we already are providing them services. And so that makes it a little difficult and trying to assist these families. And so even just the connections that we are having with these, the at least Denver and Adams, it's been a lot better, and our clients, it's a lot better for us and to help our clients and the clients to be more engaged.
Great, thank you. Tara, do you have anything to add to that about being able to collaborate with parents and making sure their voice is heard and how you amplify that voice?
Did you say me? Sorry, I couldn't help. You said Shannon or Tara. Okay. Yeah, I think Alyssa said it well. And we do have people coming here for all kinds of needs. And really relationships are the key to helping families, and our relationship with the families is one of the most important assets we bring to the whole ICWA court, in making sure they stay engaged and are connected. So I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you. Anything you would add to this, Shannon? I know I made a critique right there about service plans for families, and sometimes they end up being boilerplate. How have you guys in ICWA court, how have you guys made those service plans tailored to the needs of the family or individual families that are coming into your court? What's some of the work you've done around that?
a little bit more generally, just Denver has approached treatment plans in the last couple of years more from a behavioral-based treatment plans and looking at what is really the reason that the case came into the court before, so that we don't end up with those boilerplate treatment plans or just adding on objectives that don't really are an issue for this family or need to be addressed. So that's one effort that is occurring. The second is Denver is fortunate that we have the Denver Indian Family Resource Center and the Denver Indian Health and Family Services to offer those culturally based services to families. And I think that probably is always our baseline, as well as ensuring when there are family team meetings that those agencies are at the table. I think, as was mentioned earlier, and can be there and be a voice. But it's also important to recognize that sometimes families maybe don't want to work with the cultural based service. And there's been times where even DIFRAC has brought up to us that there may be, we may need to tweak this service a little bit, or we may need to look at a different service provider for this family for X reason. And that's how I think we make sure that we are tailoring it. While we want to meet those cultural needs, we also just overall want to make sure that the needs are at the level that the parent requires to be able to be successful. And so there's that constant collaboration happening, whether it's in the courtroom, and sometimes those discussions happen on the record, where we're finding out that some parenting time plan doesn't work, or a particular substance abuse agency that a family's been referred to doesn't work. And that's where it's great that we have both DIFRAC and DFAS and our service navigator in the courtroom, and instantaneously, as Meredith was discussing earlier, we can work that out sometimes rather than the family waiting 2 to 3 weeks later to figure out what's the best fit.
Maybe you dropped down DFAS. Who's that? Just so the people that don't know the acronym.
I apologize. It's the Denver Indian Health and Family Services.
Great. Tell me a little, well, Meredith, are you on by any chance?
I am back on, attempting this, hoping third time's the charm.
All right, awesome. And we can hear you crystal clear. So the question, and this is a question for everybody that's listening too. So if you want to put this in your answer in the chat box, that'd be really great, about some of the best ways that you engage families and help assess needs and build those relationships of trust that Meredith was even talking about before. Maybe Meredith, tell us a little bit about that work, how you best engage families. And then also maybe, I know Shannon dropped down a lot of acronyms there and clarified who they were. How have you cultivated and built those relationships? Because it's so much about relationships and how we meet the needs of families. So the service provider relationships, maybe tell us a little bit more about that, if that's okay.
I think, again, the biggest piece is really getting to know the family, earning the trust of the family, being able to figure out, especially for us, the reason we're involved is because there was some sort of safety concern that brought the family to the attention of the department. So we try very hard to kind of focus it in on what is that issue, whether it was substance use, or whether it was mental health, or whether there's a significant domestic violence component in the families that we're working with. Whatever the biggest challenges, that's where we try to channel the services and focus the services and support of the family to address those concerns, so we can either work towards maintaining children safely in their home with kind of wraparound services and family support and kin support and community support, or to safely get children to be able to return home. So a lot of this is just spending time with the individuals that are on the cases. I've had some caseworkers that when we've requested either bus passes or gift cards, will at times take the clients to Walmart to go get some food or some of the basic needs that they have, which seems to really have opened up and built a lot of that trust in those relationships, which has helped us move forward. I think the other piece is equally engaging with the tribes. I think that is a huge piece to make sure that the tribes are engaged. And once you've built those relationships with the tribes, I feel like we typically have each other's cell phone numbers. We'll shoot each other a text message or give each other a call if questions or concerns are coming up. And so really just meeting that family kind of where they are, not the one size fits all model, but focusing in on what that family is needing in that moment and trying to target your intervention to that.
That's great. Thank you. We could go to the next slide as well. And Judge Moultrie, I'll ask you this question. It's really not on this on the panel, right? I mean, on the slide right now, but just this question about, you talked a little bit about your role on the bench, but what is your role as far as coordinating all this and making sure that this is all happening, the partnerships aspect of it? I know you're newer to the bench, but that off the bench leadership, if you will, what have you found being effective with off the bench leadership and how you engage partners?
I think my perspective is, frankly, our particular ICWA court was well up and running before I got here. So I think the positive thing to say about that is that there were relationships built. And so I believe heavily that relationships are the keys to success for many of our families. And, whether it's an ICWA case or otherwise. And so, the tone I've tried to set is just an expectation of communication and collaboration wherever possible, giving some folks direction about that. And, most of the work in child welfare is not done in court, and nor should it be. And so that is the expectation I have, is that that folks are talking to each other, that they're checking in to see what's going on, that they're exchanging information regularly, so that no one should be surprised coming into court to the extent possible. Sometimes you're only getting information last minute, but even then, we've got the capability, even in virtual court, to take a minute. I'll step off the bench. Folks don't have the ability to step outside and chit chat about new information in the hallway, but I can put you in a breakout room in WebEx and give you a minute. I'll pass the case and go to something else so that we can have a meaningful discussion of kind of how to move forward with respect to a particular family's needs. So, that I guess is where I see my role. The rest of the machinery of the actual docket was done before I got here, and I'm still kind of learning it, to be frank.
Thank you. I think that's really powerful and important. I will circle back to Shannon. And Shannon, you did bring it up a little bit before about your trips to tribal communities. And we've heard it a little bit, people bring it up in this conversation that we've had about that not all tribes are the same. And ICWA does provide this little context here for not only there being a cultural component to service delivery and how we meet the needs of families, but there's also sovereign nations that have legal standing in these cases. Maybe tell us a little bit about what you learned when you went on that trip. And I know Meredith went on that trip as well, but what were some of the eye-opening things about traveling to tribal communities? I actually went on one of those trips with you. So, but what were some of your reflections when you think back to some of those tribal outreach trips that you did, and why was that important?
Remind me to come back to the importance piece, but some of the things that we found was certainly that each tribe is different. There's no doubt about that, from their structure to some of their cultural practices, to the size, to the resources that each have. I think what's the same across all of them is that they deeply, deeply care about their citizenship and about their children, and want to have their children protected as much as possible. So from that relationship piece, a lot of what did occur is just learning that we, Denver Juvenile Court, is interested in partnering with them, that we really come to this with a true heart to do this. We're not just trying to comply with the Indian Child Welfare Act or to not have a case overturned, that we really want to do the right thing. And in doing so, I think what's happened or what has developed is that, as I mentioned earlier, we have good tribal response. We work with each other to make sure that, again, that our caseworkers are having good contact with them, that they're involved in meetings, that they are involved in court hearings, and that they're heard, that we're talking to them about any potential family that may exist. And what I've seen as a result of that over the last 3 years is that we've had cases where I feel that without that collaboration would not have had some of the either parental reunification or family reunification that we've been able to establish. I can think of this case of a very high medical needs child with a rare and complicated disease that we were able to move to a family member on the Navajo Nation, where I think prior to our ICWA court starting, I'm not sure would have happened. And up until a year or so ago, I was still getting updates, or the department was, with regard to how well that child is doing and thriving in his family home. The flip side of that, I will also say there are obviously cases at times where we are not able to reunify. And since our ICWA court started, we have not had a case where the department and the tribe disagreed on how to proceed. And that's not to say we won't in the future, but I think we have, again, I think that's a demonstration of the trust that's built, that the tribe has seen we have made every effort possible to be able to put the family back together. And we're moving in this other direction because there is nothing left, and the tribe respects that and understands that based on that collaboration we were able to build over the life of that case.
Thank you. I know you were going to talk about the importance maybe at the piece at the very end, or we could go to Meredith and have her talk and reflect, give her reflection. Okay, I'll go to Meredith. Tell us a little bit about that trip and why that was important, and what you learned. What was your reflections on some of those tribal outreach trips?
So I would agree with everything that Shannon said, so I won't recapture what she's already so beautifully captured. But I think also going in that trip, being really welcomed in with open arms to meet the tribal representatives, the tribal court judges, the ICWA specialists, into individuals' own homes, being welcomed in to take part in a SWED. I think it also just brings up that maybe the Western mainstream way of healing with go to talk therapy, and some of that is not always what a family may need in order to get through healing. And there are different more cultural and more spiritual ways that people may choose to work through their healing of trauma, and involvement with the department and things like that, and just being willing to be open to that and cater our treatment plans and tailor our treatment plans to that, and acknowledging that there's different ways than what typically gets adopted into a normal, quote unquote, normal treatment plan of kind of the cookie cutter pieces. So I think that, and then also just being able to build those relationships with those tribal representatives made it much easier when we would have cases come up, or we'd have questions, or just to give them the heads up that a notice is coming on another case, or to help them or have them help us track down a tribal enrollment document or things like that. And then just really understand how heavy the workloads are for many of our tribal partners. So when we're very stressed out here, kind of in the metro area with a large number of cases, when they're the only tribal representative for the entire nation, I think that puts it into a whole different type of perspective on what kind of barriers the tribe is working within. So I think those were my biggest takeaways from that trip.
Thank you. And there is a picture right here of this is the last, we're at Rosebud Sioux in this picture that's up on the screen right now. And I do remember that trip and going to the ICWA department of one tribe, and they had stacks of ICWA notices, just monster stacks of ICWA notices that they're receiving from all over the country, you know. So it just kind of gives you a humbling feeling. It gave me a humbling feeling just of how much overworked that some of these ICWA workers are worked and confronted with. I'll give you, we're going to do, we're close to time, but I do want to make sure our audience, if you have any questions, we'll make sure we capture your question. So if you want to put it in the chat box, we'll make sure that we address your question. But I do want to give everybody a chance to kind of give a final reflection. And the reflection I want you to think about and provide for us that are all on this webinar is any practice models that you would suggest to, and if I was brand new to ICWA, if I was brand new to working with families that are facing substance use disorders, what advice would you give to me? And I reflect upon my personal experience. At one time, I did represent parents and children briefly. And I remember having this big moment for me where the light came on for me about being in the helping profession and trying to work with families, especially around substance use disorder, and that being a symptom. That's not the problem, but that being a symptom of the problem, and that the problem probably being trauma, intergenerational trauma, maybe even historical trauma, and that really kind of turned on a lot of light bulbs for me, and it changed the way that I approached the work. But for you, and we'll do a round table here, or we'll round robin before we wrap up. And if there's any questions that's left in the chat box, we'll circle back and grab those. But we'll start with you, Judge Moultrie. Advice, parting shots for us in our work.
You know, I think my, parting advice or thought would be just continuing to be self-reflective of how you're showing up in your particular role with respect to families, examining yourself, again, the listening to families and, you know, what it is that they're telling you that they need, and trying to build those relationships and just bringing it back to kind of those active efforts when I'm making those findings. And frankly, in Denver, I have found it easy to do that for the most part, because the workers are doing the work, and they're going above and beyond to try to provide support to the parents and kids. And for example, I can think of a couple of cases and where there's successes in the sense of right now we're still in the middle of them, but I've seen these caseworkers develop these relationships with parents that are kind of inching them a little bit closer and closer and closer to engaging in treatment and moving things forward, and kind of, you know, and kind of building that trust essentially. You know, I had a worker who, on a matter who was, one of the parents was facing removal proceedings from the United States, and this worker found an immigration attorney for the parent, and the parent is still in the US. That was exemplary. But primarily where I see it is the things like the building of relationships. And I think that's especially important, like you said, Sheldon, when we're talking about the substance use is the symptom of something else. Well, I think I'll just leave it there, but that's primarily, I think the collaboration and the relationships are so important to this work and moving things forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Judge. We'll go to you, Tara. Any parting shots or any advice?
I'm just so grateful that all of you are here working on this and thinking about this and wanting to do better and help disrupt these cycles of child removal and family disruption that have been going on for many generations and many hundreds of years on these lands. And it can feel overwhelming thinking about all of the barriers that Native families face and all of the trauma and all of the cycles, but also keeping in mind that the resilience that these families have, that they are here and have survived, and their ancestors have survived all of these barriers, and thinking about, you know, child everything, all of the removals, boarding schools, loss of land, involvement in child welfare system, those are all policies that were in place, and the result were individual actions. Removing individual children from families was the goal. And now we are changing policies, continuing to look at family reunification as the gold standard that was set in ICWA in 1978 and is now a gold standard across all child welfare court systems. And so, changing that policy and then reunifying or keeping kids in their families and communities one by one is the work that we do. And that is really why we are involved in this, despite all of the hardness and the hurt that we sometimes see. There's that hope and resiliency. So thank you all for doing this work.
Yeah, thank you. We'll go to Alyssa next, and there's a lot of great resources that are being dropped in the chat box as we go, and so those are resources for you guys to look at, and so please take a look at them. Alyssa, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great.
I would just reiterate a lot of what Tara said. As Native and Indigenous people to the land, like just knowing our history and our background and how a lot of that affects individuals and community. And so a lot of times it's just things that are happening even as a Native person. Sometimes I feel like with the boarding schools, things that are coming up with that, that is related to a lot of our families. And so I guess what I would say is to kind of have that compassion or the empathy of knowing that like the substance use and things are the symptoms of a larger problem that that didn't just happen overnight, and that it's reflective of even just historically where we're placed at today. So, and I'm just encourage everyone to maybe look on some of the history if you haven't, and kind of think about those things, even the land where you're from, where you're at, get to know who was those people that were there. I think that's important too, is that because it's all relational to us as Native people, is where we're from. And yeah, just encourage you to and thank you for doing the work.
Thank you for reminding us of that. And maybe that's what we should have started off with, is having everybody write the tribal lands that they're living on right now, that they're calling in from. And maybe do that if you can, right before we log off here. But Meredith, Shannon, any parting thoughts that you guys have for the group?
The only piece that I would say is really that to focus in on the relationally based trauma-informed care. I think trauma is a lot of what we are seeing really with most families within our system. And so coming from that type of a lens, that it's a much larger issue. It's not just somebody drinking or domestic violence or whatever. There's a much larger trauma that needs to be worked through. So coming into it with compassion, good intentions, and being willing to take the time to build those relationships, I think is what it's all about. And I think that's where you see the best outcomes.
Thank you, Meredith. That's important. Thank you for sharing that. Shannon.
I would probably echo a lot of the comments, just that you have to acknowledge your own biases when you're looking at whether it's setting up an Indian Child Welfare Act court or working with these cases. You need to do that again with any dependency and neglect case and in this work. But doing that, being willing to learn about another culture, lots of different cultures, and really the cornerstone, if you're looking at what is a good practice model, is a training with regard to the Indian Child Welfare Act that is heavily involved with addressing these pieces and understanding the trauma. And then from there has to be a practice model where the tribe is involved at each and every stage of the case, not just in the courtroom, which is very important, and that courts make their courtrooms accessible to tribes, whether it's via phone, web-based, or in person, but that they have the option always to appear in any form, but that the tribes are also involved with the families at each stage within the process within the child welfare system as well. I just think having that voice and that perspective really helps to shape the outcome of the case as well.
Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate that. I do want to just make sure that if you have any questions about this training, this session right here, or any of the resources, my email and Adria's email are right here on this last slide right here. So please feel free to drop us an email and follow up on it. We have some really great resources, and hopefully there's going to be this cool web page, website that's going to come out that really profiles a lot of the work that ICWA courts are doing. And when that goes live, we'll make sure we blast that as far and wide as we possibly can. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, everybody on the webinar. Really appreciate the work that you're doing for Indian children and families. Sincerely, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Niacham, thank you so much.